Thanks very much, everyone. I was just curious, do I have the ability to share my screen?
You should now.
Okay, great. I just have to convince myself I know which one to share. So I'm hopeful that you can see my slide that says Stevens Christian Fellowship Summer. Yes? Yeah. Okay, yep. Great. So I wanted to start out actually just by saying to you that I think you guys are amazing. I am so encouraged that you guys are meeting during the summer and that you're gathering together in this way. I think that it's an amazing thing that you're doing for each other, to support each other and love each other through this time. I think I'm just so blessed. I'm just so amazed. I think it's wonderful. I just want to give you guys kudos and tell you what a fantastic thing that you're doing to maintain this connection with each other, to maintain this relationship, to hold each other up in prayer, to encourage each other, to worship, all the different ways in which you are encouraging each other throughout the week. I think it's beautiful. I think it's amazing. And I just want to give you guys kudos for doing it. So good on you guys. For those of you who don't know me, I am an elder at Hoboken Grace Community Church in Hoboken. And, you know, you guys have been on my mind a lot during this time. I mean, as we all know, this is a time of incredible uncertainty. You know, when I went to college, I didn't know what was going to happen in the future, but I didn't have the same level of uncertainty and tumult that we're living in now. I mean, you've seen the joke, I know that you have, of somebody just saying, you know, what is the next chapter going to hold? It's like a bad scripted episode from some crazy television show where everything that happens is just this next weird plot twist. You know, we're all like, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen at the end? What's it all going to resolve out to? When is it going to be over? We all want to know what is going on, what's going to happen next, and how's it going to turn out? And it would be great if we could know the future, right? I know that this summer's theme is prophecy, but wouldn't it be great to know the future? I mean, what would you want to know if you could know the future? Would you want to know like lottery ticket numbers? Like, what are the winning lottery ticket numbers? Or maybe you're working on a school project and you want to know the answers to the exam. Although that one's really not fair because you could know the answers to the exam. They're probably in the book or in the lecture or whatever, but like to know in advance specifically which questions are going to be asked so you could just study those sections, that would be cool. Maybe, you know, you're asking questions about relationships, like in the future, who will I marry? Will I have kids? What job will I have? What city will I live in? Where will I move to? All of these questions that we have about the future, we keep asking ourselves. And for a lot of us, that's the communication that we have with God. We ask God all of these questions and we sort of ask him all the time, hey, show me what's going to happen in the future. Even before you're probably communicating with God, like, what school should I go to? What major should I have? Should I take this job? Will I date this person or that person? Or what do I need to do to get that person to start dating me? Should I keep dating this person? Should I get married? You know, all these questions about the future, we want him to tell us what to do. And so, you know, you can see that a lot of people sort of associate the role of prophecy with the ability to predict the future. And some of the most notable prophets in history demonstrated their connection with God through their ability to predict the future. We could tell, hey, they had this ability, this special connection with God by the way that they stated, hey, this is what's going to happen, and then it came true. I know recently you guys studied the account of Elijah, and when he met up on Mount Carmel and met with the prophets of Baal and was like, okay, whoever God can make this sacrifice burn, that's the real God. And he predicted that his God would be the one that would do it. And then it came true, and everybody's like, yeah, you're right, you're the prophet, you're the guy. And so, you know, the ability to predict the future and to tell what the future is a key part of what it means to be a prophet. If you were to ask people on the street, like, what is a prophet? They'd say, they can tell the future. They can predict the future. And it would be such a cool skill. It's reasonable to sort of expect that the role of prophet is the ability to predict the future. But I don't think that's all that defines a prophet. For a lot of us, it's synonymous. We believe that being a prophet is telling the future. They're the one and the same. But there's more. There's more to it. It's someone who speaks for God. A prophet is someone who speaks with God's voice. Now, being a prophet is an awesome thing. I mean, those who are prophets have incredible reputations. They have incredible stories. We admire them. We look up to them. We hold them in special honor. A prophet has a special connection with God. And I think part of the reason why we believe the ability to predict the future is such a key ability for a prophet is so that we can gauge if the person who's claiming to speak for God, they actually have that special knowledge that we should trust. We listen to things they say, we balance it against what's happening, and we go, yeah, they're speaking the truth. It's a way we can evaluate it. But sometimes it's hard to know if someone is speaking with God's voice. And after all, if we could instantly recognize when God was speaking, we wouldn't need a prophet. We wouldn't need a third party to speak for God. We wouldn't need them. So that's why I'm saying that speaking as a prophet, it's about knowing God's voice. But it's more than just knowing God's voice. And so I want to tell you a little bit about the prophet that has a special place in my heart. His name is Samuel. Now, there are 2 books in the Bible that bear his name, even though we know he didn't write either one of them. After all, he was dead in the first book before it ended. And of course, by the second book was rolling around, he'd been dead for a while. So we know that he didn't write the books of Samuel. And there is a good separation in the book of Samuel, the first book of Samuel and the second book of Samuel. There's a huge plot twist in the book. But the reason why there's 2 books is largely because of the weight of the scroll. As his story plays out and his events that he influenced plays out, it got to be so voluminous that they needed to go to a second scroll because they couldn't carry all of the story in one scroll. So they couldn't put both books into one scroll. That's why we have 2. But I want to tell you a story about how it came about that I first started to come to love Samuel. And for that, I'm going to take you to 2 passages. The first passage is Daniel chapter 7. I'll read it to you. In my vision that night, I, Daniel, saw a great storm churning the surface of a great sea, with strong winds blowing from every direction. And then 4 huge beasts came up out of the water, each different from the others. And the first beast was like a lion with eagle's wings, and as I watched, its wings were pulled off and left standing with its 2 hind feet on the ground, like a human being, and it was given a human mind. Now, don't get me wrong. I love Daniel. I think he is an amazing guy. If you don't know his story, you definitely got to read it. He's got some incredible truths that are built into his life. He's a great example for us. And he could tell the future like nobody's business. But I got to tell you, I read something like Daniel 7 and I'm like, man, what's going on in this passage? I have no idea. So that's the first clue about why I like Samuel so much. The next clue is going to come from a second passage. It's in the passage from Isaiah. Great passage. All of us like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, but the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. I love that passage. It's probably one of the first passages I memorized when I became a follower of Christ. But what does this passage in Isaiah 53 tell us about Isaiah? It's got 53 chapters. It's actually got 66 chapters. It's huge. It's a huge book. So let me take you back to Samuel. Samuel is 2 books, and most of it is plot. It's a great read. The book of Samuel is the easy prophet. I mean, Daniel is cool and Isaiah is amazing, but Samuel, he's the easy prophet to read. And so that's why I like him. And I know that you know what I'm talking about. You have that class or that professor that's just easy to deal with. When I was in college, we had a class called Music Appreciation. Fridays, 2:30 p.m. We called it Clap for Credit. And you could go there, listen to some amazing music, and then clap at the end. And that's all. They took attendance, and that was the whole class. And it was such a popular class that even people in the community would come and audit that class and take the class. Now, if you audit the class and take the class, they give you student ID, and you could go take advantage of all the different resources that the school had to offer. So I went to school with over 44,000 people. So they had pools and libraries and gyms and workout rooms and racquetball courts. And I mean, they had a ton of resources. And once you had that student ID, you could get into any of them. And so that's what a lot of people in the community did, is they took this class, clap for credit. 1 credit, audit, just go and listen to beautiful music. It was super easy. In fact, it got to be such a big deal, like they had to expand like where the room that they were holding it in, and then they finally limited it to 5. You could attend the class 5 times, then you had to find a different class to take if you wanted your student ID. So anyway, Samuel's kind of like clap for credit. He's the easy prophet. Anyway, that's why I like Samuel. Anyway, I want to tell you a little bit about the setting that Samuel's story is set in. He bridges the gap between the time of the judges and the time of the kings. So let me get you caught up. So Abraham was promised by God that God would use Abraham to bless the whole world. And through Abraham's descendants, God would bless the whole world. Well, part of Abraham's descendants are the sons of Jacob. And the sons of Jacob, we know, are the 12 tribes of Israel. And during the great famine, they go to Egypt, where it's safe to go because Joseph, one of Jacob's sons, is there. Joseph, I say Jacob, but Israel is his father. So anyway, Joseph is there, and over time, the people of Egypt enslaved the Israelites. They enslaved the Israelites, and eventually Moses comes on the scene, and he rescues them from slavery in Egypt, and he sets them free, and God promises that he's going to take them to a place where they could bless the whole world. But it takes them 40 years to get there, not because of the distance, but because they needed time to be prepared, to be ready to bless the whole world. And all through that time that they're wandering in the desert, they keep going through this pattern, and the pattern's like this. God does something amazing. And then they kind of forget about the amazing thing God does, and they start to grumble. And then things get bad. And then they go, oh God, we forgot about, please rescue us from this terrible thing that's going on. And then God rescues them again. God does this amazing thing, and then they forget. And it just keeps going on and on throughout Exodus and Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. You just see that over and over and over and over again. Well, the book of Judges takes that same pattern and keeps going on and on and on. The book of Judges is 21 chapters of that very same set of circumstances. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge over Israel, that judge, he rescued them, he rescued the people from their enemies throughout the judge's lifetime. For the Lord took pity on his people who were burdened by oppression and suffering. But when the judge died, the people returned to their corrupt ways, behaving worse than those who had lived before them. They went after other gods, serving and worshiping them, and they refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. And Judges goes on like this for 21 chapters. God does something amazing in the lives of the Israeli people. They forgo him. They reap the consequences of disobeying God. They scream for help. God rescues them. Lather, rinse, repeat. 21 different chapters. So this is the setting that Samuel steps into. Now, Samuel had a very unusual childhood. His mom was married to a man who had 2 wives. One of the wives had children, and one of the wives didn't. And the wife who didn't have children, her name was Hannah. And she was teased by the wife who had children. Now, one of my favorite passages from this story is something that her husband says to her. He says, "Why are you crying, Hannah?" Elkanah would ask. "Why are you eating? Why be downhearted just because you have no children? You have me. Isn't that better than having 10 sons?" What a tool. Pro tip, guys, never say this to your wife in seriousness. Why are you sad? After all, you have me. Yeah, not so much helpful. But so Hannah wanted a baby. She wanted to be a mom. And she begged God year after year after year to let her be a mom. She was so passionate about her desire to have God hear her prayer that people around her thought she was drunk. But you can tell what's going to happen next in this story. Samuel's mom's prayer was answered, and she bore a son, and her son's name was Samuel. She must have been so happy. Did you ever get a present that made you just so happy? It was so great you would never leave it alone? When I was 6 years old, my brother bought me a robot. It was amazing. It was made out of metal. It would roll around on wheels and turn and flash laser lights and make laser blasting noises. Pew, pew, pew. It was awesome. I loved it. It made me happy. Here, I'm going to show you a picture of it. Okay, that's not really it. Mine was a lot smaller. A lot smaller. But that's basically what it looked like. I loved it. It was awesome. I took it everywhere. I would take it outside and I'd play with it on the sidewalk in front of the house. I would even play on the street in front of my house. I would take it with me to the park. I would go down to the park near where I live, and I would bring my robot with me, and I would play with him. I'd play with him on the slide. I would play with him in the sandbox. Pro tip here, robots and sand do not mix. You know, gears and sand, and it wasn't really a great thing, but it didn't matter to me. I brought him everywhere. I brought that robot everywhere I went. I mean, I took the robot to bed. I took it to bed with me. Another pro tip I've got for you: metal robots don't snuggle well. They're not soft and cushy. You know, they're kind of, you can't really lay on top of them. So yeah, pro tip, metal robots aren't really snuggly. Now, the good news is I was like 5 or 6 when I got this robot. So something about little boys, I wasn't really into taking baths. Otherwise, I might have another pro tip for you, that water can damage electronic robots. But hey, I was 5. I wasn't in the bathtub with the robot. Anyway, you get my point. I love that robot so much, I took it everywhere. So you think Hannah prayed so much for that baby that she did the same thing. She doted on Samuel and never let him out of her sight. She clung to him and wouldn't let him go anywhere and took him everywhere she went. No, that's not what happened to Samuel. When he was very young, his mom gave him away. She sent him away to boarding school. She left him at the temple to be raised by the high priest and his family. Here we have the passage from 1 Samuel chapter 1. Then the man Elkanah went up with all of his household to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, I will not go up until the child is weaned. Then I will bring him, that he might appear before the Lord and stay there forever. Wow. Wow. And that's true. It says, it goes on to say, now when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, and with a 3-year-old bull and 1 ephah of flour and a jug of wine, and brought him to the house of Shiloh, although the child was young. Wow. She loved that son so much, but she sent him away to be raised by the high priest at the temple. Wow. I mean, okay, maybe life would be great at the temple. I mean, maybe this would be better for him. Well, maybe. The family that he was adopted by wasn't the best family. Here we have in the second chapter of Samuel, now the sons of Eli were scoundrels who had no respect for the Lord or for their duties as priests. So Samuel is dropped off when he was weaned. So what is he, like 3, 4, 5, 6 years old? I mean, that would be really old to be weaned at age 6, but whatever. He's really young, and his adopted father is the high priest of the temple, and his name is Eli. And Eli has 2 sons, and they were scoundrels. They had no respect for God. In fact, what they used to do is they used to take the sacrifice that was supposed to be given to God, and they would take it for themselves. They used their position as priests to take advantage of the people and to take the best of what God was being offered to God for themselves. It goes on to say that that wasn't the limit of their scoundrelness. Eli was very old, but he was aware what his sons were doing to the people of Israel. He knew, for instance, that his sons were seducing the young women who assisted at the entrance to the tabernacle. I mean, these guys were not just like stealing from God, but they were real bad influences. And we can see here that the writer of Samuel tells us that Eli tried to get them to stop, but they didn't. Eli couldn't control his sons and keep them from acting against God and against the people of Israel. So it's not exactly like Samuel grew up in a great set of circumstances. I want to put this into modern terms for you. Samuel's family was from a broken family. His dad had 2 wives, and one of them didn't treat the other one very well. There was jealousy between them. His family was a split family, a blended family, however you want to put it. He had half brothers, he had a stepmother, and then he was adopted. He was sent away. That must have been really hard for mom to send him away to grow up away from the rest of the family with a bunch of people he didn't know. I mean, if that were you, would you feel like you were wanted at home? I mean, maybe that's not the message his mom intended to give. Maybe that's not what she intended, but it would be easy to walk away from that experience and feel like you weren't wanted at home. Samuel was impacted by people of poor character. His adopted father's sons were men who used their position to take advantage of those around him for his own gain. He was impacted by people of ill repute. His adopted father could not control his evil sons. I mean, Eli tried. In fairness, the writer of Samuel gives us an account of Eli admonishing his sons, but to no avail. Here's some other things about Samuel's growth as a child. He grew up in the church. He grew up knowing the practices of the religion of his culture. After all, he grew up literally in the temple. Samuel was impacted by people who wore the trappings of religion, but didn't live a life that reflected that commitment. Right? The sons of Eli, they were the priests of the temple, but they didn't live like they were the priests of God. Can you relate to these circumstances? I mean, I can in many different ways, right? For example, my parents were divorced. So my mom and dad often had conflict, and there was tension between my mom and my stepmom. So I can understand that. And I honestly didn't often feel wanted at home. It's not that my mom didn't want me at home. She loved me. She certainly did. But she was an introvert. She didn't have a ton of energy for me when I was growing up. So spending time alone felt natural to her. It was normal for me to go to the park and hang out by myself. That was just natural for us. And I had older brothers who were rapscallions. They were not model citizens, let me tell you. From them, I learned how to steal and lie and vandalize and skip school and flaunt the rules. I had those negative influences in my life too. So these are some of the ways that I can relate to Samuel's experience. But how about you? I don't know if you can, but can you find your own connection to Samuel's upbringing? Maybe you had the opposite experience. Maybe you had a great childhood. Maybe you have great parents and a great family. But if you look at Samuel's life and you look at his beginnings, you would say the cards were stacked against him. And yet, Samuel becomes a prophet. He becomes a great man of God. So I want to take you to another event in Samuel's life. It's another key event for him. Here we are in chapter 3. Meanwhile, the boy Samuel served the Lord by assisting Eli. Now, in those days, messages from the Lord were very rare, and visions were quite uncommon. And one night, Eli, who was almost blind by now, had gone to bed. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was sleeping in the tabernacle near the ark of God. And suddenly the Lord called out, "Samuel!" "Yes," Samuel replied. "What is it?" He got up and he ran to Eli. "Here I am. Did you call me?" "I did not call you," Eli replied. "Go back to bed." So he did. And then the Lord called out again, "Samuel!" And again, Samuel got up and went to Eli. "Here I am. Did you call me?" "I didn't call you, my son," Eli said. "Go back to bed." So to put the settings here, Samuel is young, probably in his teenage years. That's what most scholars believe. Certainly old enough to work in the temple by himself and be allowed to manage the fire and the oil of keeping the lamps lit, right? God's presence was in the tabernacle, and it was Eli's job to keep the lamps lit so the people of Israel would remember that God was present in their lives all the time. So I can't really give you from my own life how old Samuel was, because I was probably about 6 years old when I stole a book of matches from the junk drawer and set fire to stuff down at the park. So I don't know how old necessarily how Samuel was, but I can tell you from my own experience, how old I was. But by the way, that leads me to another pro tip. Metal robots also contain plastic, which melt when you heat it. So again, I don't know how old he was when that experience occurred, but he was in the temple and God was calling out to him, and Samuel did not recognize God's voice. So it happens again. Here we are, verse 7. Samuel did not yet know the Lord because he never had a message from the Lord before. So the Lord called a third time, and once more Samuel got up and went to Eli. Here I am. Did you call me? Then Eli realized it was the Lord calling the boy. So he said to Samuel, go and lie down again. And if someone calls again, say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. So Samuel went back to bed. And the Lord came and called as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel replied, speak, your servant is listening. So here's this experience where Samuel first starts to hear from God. And here are a couple of takeaways for this passage. First, it took time for Samuel to recognize God's voice. He didn't recognize it right away. And from that, we can learn that it takes practice to learn what God's voice sounds like in our lives. He kept thinking the voice he heard was Eli. But fortunately, God doesn't give up. Notice that even though it took several times for Samuel to get the clue that God was speaking to him, God doesn't give up. And where is God pursuing you right now? Because I know that God is pursuing you right now. Doesn't matter where you've been or where you are, what you're doing or who you are. I know that God is pursuing you right now. Now, maybe you've said to yourself, and I've said this to myself, God isn't pursuing me, he's already caught me. You know that song, Reckless Love, there's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Speaking of God's love, it says, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, it leaves the 99. And maybe you think to yourself, I'm the 99. God's not pursuing me. But God promises that he is continuing to pursue you. He doesn't give up. Philippians 2:13 says, for it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. God doesn't stop pursuing you. He keeps on pursuing you, no matter where you are. Paul wrote earlier in Philippians 1, for I'm confident of this very thing. He who began a good work in you will perfect it until the day of Christ Jesus. So, how is God pursuing you? Especially in the midst of this circumstance. Where is he at work in your life? Is he trying to build a new habit in you? Caitlin said it very well. She's like, maybe you should be memorizing the Bible. You actually might have more free time on your hands. That's what I'm doing. So yeah, I've written down some passages on little cards, and I have them at my desk, and I'm trying to memorize a little bit more of the Bible. When I first started to follow Christ, I memorized big chunks of the Bible. I didn't memorize big chunks. No, that's not true. I memorized a bunch of Bible verses, and I found it to be really valuable to me. I told you one of the passages that I memorized. It was Isaiah 53:6. And I found those passages to be able to speak within me. And so is God trying to build a new habit within you? Is he trying to build a habit of memorizing scripture within you in this time and season that we're in? Is he trying to break a destructive habit that you already have? Is he trying to tear one down that you've got already in place? And he can use this time that you have right now to tear down that destructive habit. I don't know how God is pursuing you right now. The only thing I know for sure is I know he is pursuing you right now. I know he hasn't given up. That there's no wall he won't kick down. There's no lie he won't tear down coming after you. So I want to encourage you during this season to take some quiet time with God, asking him to reveal himself to you and to show you what work he's trying to do in you right now. Just like Samuel was quiet in the temple and God spoke to him. Now, the next thing I want you to notice is that God used Eli to help Samuel recognize his voice. Samuel needed Eli to help him recognize that God was trying to speak to him. Is there somebody in your life now who's working with you to try to help you connect with God? I love what you guys are doing here, right? You're helping each other to connect with God. You're helping each other to listen to his voice, to hear him, to see how he's pursuing you. I love this. Who else in your life might be helping you to hear God's voice? Do you have a pastor or a small group leader, or is there somebody else in your life that is helping you to hear God's pursuit of you? Because God does use people in our lives to help us to see him at work. Now, the next thing I noticed is that God uses Samuel right away in Eli's life. And God wants to use you in somebody else's life. If you look at this passage that talks about what happened when the Lord spoke to Samuel, the Lord said to Samuel, I'm about to do a shocking thing in Israel. And he goes on to explain the terrible things that are going to happen to Eli and his corrupt sons, and how he's warned Eli and his family, hey, you got to quit blaspheming my name. You've got to stop stealing from my people. And so that's a really scary thing for a teenage boy to say to his adopted father. And so Samuel stayed in bed until morning, and he got up and he went and did his work. He opened the doors of the tabernacle as usual, but he was afraid to tell Eli what the Lord had said to him. But Eli called out to him and said, Samuel, my son. Here am I, Samuel replied. What did the Lord say to you? Tell me everything. And then he threatened Samuel, and may God strike you and even kill you if you hide anything from me. And so Samuel told Eli everything. He didn't hold anything back. It's an amazing step that Samuel took. Because once Samuel heard God's voice, and once God called Samuel, the next thing that Samuel does is to say yes to God. See, God told him to tell Eli what he was going to do. And Eli had to pull it out of him. But Samuel said yes to God. And it must have been really, really hard. It must have been really, really scary. But he did what God called him to do. In my experience of my relationship with God, there's one thing I did at the beginning that I'm grateful for. And that is that I learned to say yes to God. Now, when you look at the progression of faith, you might break it down this way. There are people who believe, who give a mental assent to the core spiritual truths, that God wants the best for people, that sin separates us from God, and it keeps us from fully experiencing God's love, but that Jesus came to take the penalty for our sin to reunite us with God, but that we must individually receive that free gift from Jesus, take the gift that he offers, and accept the mercy that's extended to us by God. And there are people who believe that truth. And it's a key first step. And maybe this is your yes today. Maybe you need to say yes to Jesus and accept that gift of mercy that he is offering to you. But then there are others who are followers of Christ, not only do they assent to those core truths, but they are actively seeking, like, how can I follow Christ? What can I do that God is calling me into? And how can I follow it? A friend of mine is demonstrating this truth in his life right now in an amazing way. He's been living with his girlfriend, but he took the step to move out because he realized that God was calling him to follow the teachings of Christ. He realized he would love his girlfriend better by placing their physical relationship at the right level, given the commitment that they have in place. It was a hard step. It was a scary step. But he chose to follow Christ in sacrificing what was pleasurable for what was more loving. But then there are the disciples. Those are the ones who say, I don't want to just follow God, but I want to be like Jesus. I want to conform to his character. I want his will to influence my decisions. I want to reflect his nature in my relationships. And everything I do and say, I want to say yes to God. When I first became a believer in Christ, I looked back at my life and I realized I had learned a lot of lessons the hard way. I learned a lot of lessons the hard way. But I decided that going forward, I wanted to learn lessons the easy way. And I believe to learn things the easy way is to say yes to God right away. I'm sure all of us want to recognize God's voice. We all want to be able to know where God is leading us. But what sets a prophet apart from the ability is not only the ability to know what God is saying in our individual lives, but also for the lives of the people around us. When we look at the books of the Bible, part of what defines the prophet is that they speak for God, and they can inform a whole culture about what God is saying to them about himself, about them, and about their relationship with God. To me, this is what sets apart a prophet from others. And so now I want to ask you, how is God calling you to be his voice in someone else's life? Who does God want to impact through you? I encourage you, pray through this decision. Invite God into the conversation, because then you're ready to say yes to God. After all, God is calling us to hear his voice, and he promises that he will let us know him intimately. And when we say yes to God, we can have an impact not only in our own lives, but in the lives of the people around us. Will you pray with me? Father, I am grateful for the lessons that Samuel can teach us even at this early stage in his life. I'm grateful that he said yes to you in so many different ways. Teach us how to say yes to you as well. Teach us what that would look like in our lives. And I just ask God that you would speak into these men and women, speak into their lives right now. I don't know what work you have to be doing, that you're trying to do in their lives. I don't know what habit you're trying to build or what habit you're trying to break. I don't know what you're trying to do in their lives, what you're trying to teach them, who you're trying to reach through them. But you do. And I ask that you reveal yourself to them, that you help them to see you calling them, that you help them to hear what you're saying to them in the quiet points of their lives. And then they say yes to you. Thanks again, God, for all that you're doing. Thank you for the gift of Jesus Christ and the mercy that he gives us, the grace that you give us through him, so that we can come into your presence and to know you intimately. Thank you. Amen.
Thank you, Justin.
Huzzah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was awesome. I look forward to hearing from you again next week.
I look forward to being with you guys next week as well.
So just some reminders before I sign off. We've got small groups tomorrow where we will be talking about Samuel. Not necessarily directly aligned to what we talked about tonight. So if you guys have any friends that you want to invite, or you notice somebody was missing tonight, make sure you invite them to small groups. It's going to be awesome. On Friday, our fellowship night will be Among Us, free app on the App Store, whether it's iPhone or Android. So join us on Discord for that. It'll be at 8 p.m. And then 1820, as always, on Monday for our prayer night. Next week, come back to hear the second part of this message. And until then, I hope that you all have a great rest of your week.
Huzzah.
Thank you, Justin.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
You too. You too. Oh, man.
James, can you stop the recording, please?
So